Welcome to the Navic Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navic's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navic.co. This episode is brought to you by Lightspeed Venture Partners. Lightspeed is a globally leading venture capital firm with over $29 billion in capital under management and more than 500 investments across the US, Europe, and Asia. With its dedicated gaming practice, Lightspeed Gaming, the firm is investing from over $7 billion in early and growth stage capital, making it by far the largest fund focused on gaming and interactive technology. Lightspeed's team combines deep expertise in gaming with a global multi-stage investment platform and a culture that truly puts founders first. Selected investments include Epic Games, Snap, and Stability AI, as well as game designers and producers who led the creation of titles like Fortnite, Call of Duty, League of Legends, Valorant, StarCraft 2, and many more. For more information, simply go to gaming.lsvp.com or check out the details in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Navic Roundtable. I'm your host, Devin Becker, and with me I have excellent guests as always. We got Matt, Tammy, and Dave here today. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Doing pretty good. Heading into the last chunk of the year, right? We're deep in Q4 now.
Yeah, definitely. And I imagine we'll see some, business results of that, of course, as people trying to cram stuff into the end of the year, at least the calendar year. But we also have some great topics today. A lot of stuff updating and just stuff we've been trying to, talk about for a while, hopefully resolving. Biggest one, of course, being Unity now losing everyone's favorite CEO. Some stuff on the stock market acquisitions. That should be interesting. Diablo maybe coming to the old hate train on Steam. And EA managing to do, I believe, quite well with their FIFA switch up. And then the unfortunate topic of layoffs. But it's got to be said at this point. So why don't we just jump right in to the Unity topic.
Sure. Thanks, Devin. So just a quick update here. I thought it'd be worth raising this news item given the ongoing saga at Unity. So the latest is that John Riccitiello is out as CEO of Unity. He is stepping down, as I understand it. Who knows whether he was forced out, whether he's ready to retire or not. We can speculate on that in a little bit. But in short, he is leaving the CEO role. He's being replaced on an interim basis by a former IBM executive named James Whitehurst. And Unity is saying they'll initiate a comprehensive search process, find a new permanent CEO, and they are reiterating their previous third quarter guidance. So, I mean, I don't think this is a huge surprise. He was certainly taking a lot of heat, and he had been pretty quiet in terms of the public response to the backlash that was going on. It seemed to all sort of fall to like Mark Whitten and some of the other folks. Obviously not like a beloved CEO generally. He was the CEO of EA when they were named worst company in America 2 years in a row, something like that. So I guess the speculation next is like, what happens next with Unity? Who replaces him? And also, like, what happens to the company? Does someone try to acquire them? Do we see them make any further changes? It sounds like they've already kind of made their backtrack. They're not going to change the pricing structure too much anymore. But what happens with Unity? Any thoughts on this ongoing saga, or just no surprises?
No surprises, but I do think that there's been already some speculation that I've seen around about is Apple going to try to bid for Unity again? Of course, that would raise probably like FTC eyebrows there, especially with Iron Source under Unity. So something there would have to get worked out, but. It'll be interesting to see where Unity goes from here. Definitely, a lot of turmoil the last few weeks over there.
Yeah, I don't really see any significant bids for Unity right now. A couple of headwinds, I think. One, money's not cheap right now. It was certainly a much better situation monetarily for acquisitions back when AppLovin first was interested in joining up with Unity. Two, I think the second part is this has really highlighted what a challenge it is running a platform business and where you can actually see significant revenue from, especially given you're now seeing even the Epic now adding fees for seat fees for non-game usage for the Unreal Engine. Yeah, certainly not a surprise about John coming out. The level of backlash is certainly warranted some sort of level of response over on the Unity side. I think the question is, what type of person are they going to use? Are they going to bring in to replace John? Are they going to bring someone who is more developer friendly? Back to the days of when they first started up, they really were a developer first company and really had that image. Are they going to go back to something like that, or are they going to try and maintain sort of we need to figure out how we're going to make revenue out of what we have and try and bring somebody else in that's a little bit more revenue focused, and damn the responses from the developers.
It definitely seems like, at least for the purposes of trying to keep the stock from plummeting too much, it might be a good idea to just bring in someone that developers like, but that will still do what the board wants. Like, if I'm the board, I'd just be like, well, let's bring in someone we know will do what we want still. So we're still basically running the company, but someone that will make the developers happy, because trust is the major issue now, right, at this point. So I think, hey, just bring in someone they like, and then just have them mostly just say what people want to hear, but then do what we want to do. That's sounds like American politics as well, but we'll see. Obviously the stock is the big concern right now for the board, right? Like they I gotta imagine they're going to want to replace someone soon, or at least just wait till this quiets down and then just spend some more time searching if it's not continuing to affect the stock. But speaking of the stocks, there was quite a few different things as well as some acquisition news. Want to dig into?
So that was a great transition, and every week there's some little quick beats on whether it's acquisitions or stock market reacting to a bunch of the game companies that are public. So I did want to go through some quick beats from the last week just to keep everyone up to date, because we tend to cover a lot of these companies on a regular basis. So some news from actually two of the Swedish companies that are aggregating and acquiring game companies. The first one, Embracer. We've talked quite a bit about Embracer, and their rocky year continues. Last week, they actually got dropped from several S&P lists. And just for context, what this actually means is, it hasn't really impacted their stock. It took a big hit at the end of September. There doesn't seem to be a significant drop that came with getting dropped from the S&P lists, but it does mean that it's no longer part of kind of that aggregation or list of companies that are being endorsed as good investments. So really, this is going to make Embracer's path to recover from their lowest point right now in terms of their stock price even harder. Like they're 65% of they've seen a 65% drop. So it's just going to make it very, very challenging. And I think it highlights just in general, it brings up questions about this strategy of aggregating companies, in which is what Embracer was betting on all along and was very aggressive about. There's also, questions about, how the market perceives this strategy and just kind of games live ops in general. I think is it is hard. It's a industry that has tight margins these days, and that is certainly something that public companies don't like to have. So it's a little bit of a tough spot to be. On the other hand, another aggregator, MTG, also Swedish, they kind of started around the same time as Embracer to do this kind of strategy of acquisitions, but they've been very cautious about it. They haven't been fast and furious in the way that Embracer was. So their portfolio is much smaller, and they just announced their latest acquisition, taking a majority of 70% of Snowprint Studios. They're the makers of Warhammer Tacticus, which launched last year and has been doing really, really well. They've been out for a year. They got a bunch of awards. They've generated $24 million in revenue in their first year. And they join, as I said, kind of a smaller portfolio with InnoGames, their main game being Forge of Empires, Congrade, Hutch Games that makes Top Drives and F1 Clash, Ninja Kiwi with the Bloons TD franchise, and a team out of India, Play Simple, that focuses on word games. So that's the latest there on our Swedish friends, and one that came out today from the rumor mill, and I'm going to caveat all of this, totally rumor mill, but Disney reportedly is looking to acquire a major publisher, and they threw out there very non-committal, maybe something like EA. So we'll have to see if that turns into anything. I mean, Disney has the ability to acquire just like giants, and we've seen it in franchises, movie franchises, just brand franchises. So if they want to make it happen, they'll probably will. But it's left to be seen if they actually go and try to acquire someone like EA or someone else. It could be someone like Take-Two, maybe. I don't know. So, what? Any other additional thoughts to add to that kind of list of quick small beats from the week?
I have a couple quick hitters. First, on the EA bit, I think personally, I'm going to just throw some water on that. Like, this is like the news that comes up every couple of quarters that EA and Disney are going to get together, or some company is going to acquire EA. I was looking at this yesterday, and there was like a game developer article that had the headline like Disney considers buying EA, something like that. And then that linked to a Bloomberg article, and the original Bloomberg article said something like Bob Iger's advisors recommend something like EA, something like. So it just didn't seem very strong in terms of like sources to me. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But as I said, this sort of Disney EA stuff comes up all the time. But I am an EA shareholder, so I hope someone acquires them. On the MTG side, I thought that was kind of interesting. I was reading, I think it was InvestGame, so shout out to them. They had mentioned something about MTG was still kind of riding high from their sale of ESL. Like they still had a bunch of cash left over from selling ESL to the Saudis, which I thought was interesting. So maybe they will be doing a little bit more bargain hunting in this sort of down market period. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think the in terms of the purchase of Snowprints there, I do think it's MTG's strategy seems a little slower pace than Embracer, not just in terms of number of acquisitions, but also getting to know their partners a little bit more before making those acquisitions. And in regards to EA, let's see what we've had: Apple acquiring EA, NBC Universal acquiring EA, Amazon, Disney. How many times? Like one point, Microsoft was supposed to acquire them as well.
I think that for me would really it's probably like Disney's getting pushed to through like their advisors, more like Disney's getting pushed to like, hey, you should look at game companies. Because you need to add that to like for real. Like they've kind of like dabbled in games and try to like license and have some small studios, but they've never really gone big into games. And I think that for me, like that's really kind of like the takeaway is there might be a little bit more push there for Disney to consider seriously going after someone big.
Yeah.
EA, probably not, but who knows? But someone big.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, they certainly are looking at what is their overall media structure. Right now, Iger's certainly getting pushed to divest the television stations, and what is the replacement for those inside the media ecosystem that they've put together, right? And as they're looking at IP that allows them to take advantage of all the ways they're able to utilize IP, be it from film and television through to theme parks, through to merchandise, through to all the different ways that they take advantage of their properties and bring it across all sorts of media. There is a source for that in video games, and we're certainly starting to see that more and more inside things being brought to television series, such as The Last of Us, and seeing the success of those these days as compared to some of the challenges that bringing video game IP had to other media, much earlier. So I mean, I can certainly see why people would again link Disney with EA. It's just but at this point, yeah, I 100% agree. This is just smoke and rumors.
I think the whole conversation around Disney acquiring any game company is an interesting one, because obviously they've had games made around their IP, and some of them have done well, some of them have not, but they've generally been a company that makes their money off of kind of licensing out that IP, right? They build up the IP through movies and TV shows and things like that, and then they license it out, and that's part of how they make. Obviously, they maintain some control over it. So I mean, it would be interesting, but I think their own doing a lot of that sort of content creation themselves, like through Disney Plus, for example, hasn't worked out great for them. But at the same time, that's part of the problem, right? Is Disney is not doing well in the theaters, because theaters, Disney was already having to hardball them as much as possible just to get more profit than anyone else, because they were driving most of the ticket sales through all the properties they own. And then that's kind of died off for the most part. And they've had a whole bunch of bombs in a row for the most part, both in theaters as well as in Disney Plus, which seems to be a big problem for Disney, is just that streaming service altogether. So at this point, it's well, what do you do? Obviously, if your TV channel isn't working, if your movies in the theaters aren't really working, the theme parks are down, where do they go from there? And in staying in the entertainment business, it does make some sense to consider whether or not video games are a good fit. The question is, obviously, they're not just going to make, if they were to do so, right, they wouldn't just make a bunch of just Disney IP games, right? Or Marvel or Star Wars. I mean, obviously those would get made, and there's tons of those already, right? They already inhabit every platform. But the question is then, what kind of company with what reputation would they go for? In movie studios, for example, they had kind of a few different movie studios that would do different kinds of things that didn't necessarily fit with their sort of family-friendly fare, like Miramax and things like that, which that obviously turned out very anti-Disney friendly. But, that's what I wonder is, if they were to go to acquire a company, obviously acquiring a company with a both good and bad reputation like EA could be interesting. But that seems like the big question to me, is if they're considering that, which they probably should be, just in terms of where else they could go from here, it would be who actually makes the fit there. But I mean, in terms of people moving their stuff to other platforms and stuff like that, we did have some interesting news related to this, in terms of Diablo moving over to Steam, along with eventually, many other Activision Blizzard titles following up from Overwatch.
Thank you, Devin. And as Devin just gave away half of my story, Diablo is headed off to Steam. So Diablo will be showing up on Steam as of October 17th. The page is already live on Steam. And really is a follow-up of Activision trying to diversify a little bit where they're offering their titles. Overwatch had made a similar move previously. And of course, now with the Activision Microsoft deal closing, we'll start seeing Diablo and other titles starting to show up on another platform, namely the Game Pass. So recently, what the feedback has been is that, look, as soon as the deal closes, which people are expecting will close somewhere probably late this week, early next week, that, we're going to start seeing a whole flood of Activision titles on the Game Pass, probably not immediately. We may see some fairly soon, but by the sounds of it, the companies are prepping people for 2024s for when titles will start showing up on Game Pass. So we can probably expect to see Diablo IV and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 showing up on Game Pass, hopefully early 2024 or somewhere between there and mid 2024, I'm sure. And for me, one of the interesting things, now that the overall transaction looks like it's going to close, and we're going to start seeing all the Activision Blizzard King titles as part of the overall Microsoft ecosphere. The one question I have for the group here is, once that has happened, Microsoft's able to then start putting in their Xbox Live login across all of their titles. So, already exists with all of the current Microsoft titles, but now this can go into Blizzard titles, Activision titles, King titles, and in effect, they will actually have the largest or widest breadth view of players' habits, where they're logging in, what games they're logging into. If people play Candy Crush, well, what other games do they play? Do they play on console? Do they play on PC? So I really am curious to see what what Microsoft does with that information. Are they going to start seeing some, suggestions of, hey, you like playing Candy Crush? Well, you should try Flight Sim on PC, or, you really like playing, such and such RPG. You should go check out this other game. But I'm really curious to see what Microsoft does with that information. And I wanted to open it up to the panel and kind of get your all's take in terms of, once Microsoft has that sort of information, what are the things they could do with it?
I think the first thing for me that comes to mind is that they actually have an ad network that they could plug everything into and get better insights. Like when you open up like your Windows menu, or your like the little sidebar on Windows, there's a bunch of ads. They're starting to put ads in all of their experiences. That's a potential revenue stream for them. I think they can certainly learn a lot with all that data. I guess my hesitation is that like something that large will take a long time, I think, to really bear fruit in practice. This is a massive organization with many different sort of parts that need to be sort of integrated from a data standpoint, and then cleaned up and organized and made accessible to everyone. And I think they'll get there, but I think that that's like a pretty large undertaking, at least based on my experience working in large organizations. But I think you're totally right that that's like a huge opportunity for them. And what they do with it will be really interesting. They could do all sorts of segmentation and targeted offers and recommendations. It could be quite interesting.
Like they already have that infrastructure in place, because right now you can download Microsoft Collections on mobile, and it does have Xbox Live integrated into that. So they do have the infrastructure, the ability to have all of those pieces already tied together. It's now just adding in the titles themselves in order to fill out that information.
Yeah, I think that I'm a little bit more skeptical about it, just because. So there's two pieces that, I mean, it would be incredibly powerful if they do anything smart, like even like basically like aggregating and smart about it. But I do agree that it's going to be potentially like they need to have a vision for what that is first, to be able to go to each individual team and each individual studio, because you are like separate studios that are running all these different games that are across the board, and get them integrated into that system. And that tends to, as Matt was saying, I agree that it's just super hard to get that traction in a large organization, coming from kind of like the mandate almost of like Xbox, Microsoft, into each individual, team and game that they own, or at least the ones that they care to get that information from. So I'm a little bit skeptical about their ability to execute it. I think that they need to have a super strong vision on how they use this basically footprint that you're calling out, which is, I totally agree. It's incredible, like just footprint across almost the whole industry, if not the whole, like every single distribution platform. But if they don't have kind of like this cohesive vision of how to do it and what to do with it, it's going to be either just thrown in like, hey, an additional login that you can do, and then they don't do anything with that information, or it's even like to get to that place where teams even integrate that additional login, it just gets pushed into like the nth priority in the roadmap and not really tackled.
The reason why I think there is an internal push to do it, or there could be an internal push to do it, is if you look at Microsoft's push for as a services company, with Game Pass, games as a service, in terms of the distribution side of things. Those platforms work really well when you have a lot of content with a variety of types of content that makes people go, yeah, this is something I'm interested in paying, $9 a month, $15 a month, $20 a month. And so if they've got that integration and they've got all of the titles as part of that, then it just makes a much more compelling offer. And we're seeing that Game Pass is something that they are wanting to keep moving forward. And for me, that certainly two different minds of that. From on one side, as a parent, I love the fact that Game Pass means that I can say, hey, you've got a whole hundreds of games to go play. I don't need to go buy a bunch of individual games for my kids. But as a game developer, the business model of making games through a Game Pass or subscription service certainly isn't as enticing as more of an open market type game.
I have a couple thoughts related to that. I'd be curious to get your guys' feedback on related to this whole transition, both over to Steam and over to Microsoft. Somewhat related. So the first thing is that Overwatch moving over to Steam might have made some sense because it was like a free-to-play game, and they obviously were not doing super great. And with a free-to-play game, you're trying to get the biggest audience possible, so it makes sense to go to the biggest PC platform. You're like, okay, well, I mean, despite the huge amount of negative reviews, it potentially exposes itself. People go, well, I can at least try it for free. Whereas moving over a premium game like Diablo that requires an upfront purchase is a pretty big deal, because when it comes to upfront purchases, you're dissuaded by negative reviews, or at least I certainly am. When I see like a mostly negative or even mixed, I'm unwilling to make a purchase more often than not. And there's no doubt it's going to be review bombed to death. Like whether people like actually dislike the game or just dislike a lot of the monetization, things like that. It seems like it's not going to be a great thing for Diablo. I mean, they may get some additional sales, maybe during Steam sales, but this doesn't seem like something that's really doing much to expand Diablo's audience, especially this late in the game when they tend to not be able to expand super great. And it's time to start when Season 2 starts. The upside is that's when they've addressed a whole bunch of, suppose, issues like quality of life kinds of things. And so that maybe this is a hope that people will give it a new chance. But on the other hand, I do wonder if this is part of a transition to move away from Battle.net, the whole launcher and everything like that, as part of the maybe towards the Microsoft transition, where they start to move towards, you guys are talking about merging IDs and things like that. Bethesda games, Bethesda has their own launcher, but look at the games kind of moving into the Xbox app and the Windows, Xbox games for PC and things like that. So that seems like where this could be headed, in my opinion, and like that this Steam transition is kind of a way to start to transition away from dependency on Battle.net. Prior to being able to move into the other thing. Obviously, Call of Duty as well is in Steam, for example. So it's not the first Activision Blizzard game, just one of the second Blizzard game specifically. The other thing is that you mentioned the Game Pass stuff, and it seems like it'll be an interesting mix for Blizzard, especially because they have not been good at sort of free-to-play live service models. When it comes to making money, they've been much better, at least traditionally, at the sort of big, highly quality, polished, models where they put out a game, it's somewhat worth buying at launch, or at least shortly after launch. and then you hopefully get your money's worth out of time and maybe buy some things. But in general, like the in-app purchase thing seems to work better for something like Call of Duty. And while Activision has had a lot of influence over Blizzard, it hasn't really gone well with Blizzard's audience. So I'd be really curious, especially how that might be affected by Game Pass with these games being on there. Like, so for example, like I suspect that Starfield didn't get hugely impacted in sales by Game Pass. But as this goes forward, especially people skeptical about future games coming out of Blizzard, may consider just trying them out on Game Pass. So, for example, I'm very guilty of I bought Payday 3, prior to launch, so I could preload it and all that. Saw the horrible reviews and thought, you know what, I have Game Pass. I'm just going to get a refund on Steam because they're very generous about the refunds, like sight unseen, and then just play it on Game Pass before I decide if I want to buy it back again. So those kinds of issues will creep up, I imagine, as there's more like kind of competition between those. And then I guess just lastly, as a side note, the merging of the IDs will be, I think, interesting. If anyone remembers, or I'm still dealing with the repercussions of the Mojang merge from Minecraft over to Microsoft IDs. I still don't think I've completed that successfully after many years of trying to merge those two. So I do hope it's nothing like that. And there's the chance we could see Battle.net IDs completely subsumed by that service. So thoughts?
Yeah, it won't be clean. We'll just say that right now. It's going to be a hot mess for a while as they sort that through. But yeah, I mean, and certainly they're not. I mean, EA's had challenges in terms of switching stuff over from various systems, even internal systems. As you said, Microsoft and Mojang had problems with Minecraft. Yeah, it's going to be it'll be a hot mess for a while.
It's an interesting point about Battle.net. I hadn't really thought about that. I also didn't know before you mentioned it, Devin, that Bethesda had their own launcher too. Did they do away with that completely now, or they still have it? Like
I'm trying to remember. Like last time I went to try and update Fallout 76, which I don't really play much, but it was like, yeah, try it out. I think it kind of directed me over to the other installer where I installed it from, but I don't quite recall. But I do imagine that it's, it's not the greatest launcher. There's not really a solid reason to keep it. So, I mean, might as well move away from it, especially with there's no reason Xbox, like Microsoft wouldn't want to promote their Xbox app over that any day. So it seems like some of these launchers from these companies acquiring them should probably just be phased out.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think like there's something to say for like brand affinity, right? Like people might feel more strongly about Blizzard than they do about Microsoft, or they don't really follow the day-to-day of the acquisition talks or whatever. Like, I'm only interested in my Blizzard games. I'm going to go to Battle.net. Maybe there's a reason to keep it. But to your point, maybe it's also like to use a buzzword, a synergies thing with the acquisition, where they can just kind of like combine forces and, have it all under one sort of central tech team.
You think they'd want to? You think they want, when you're going into those games, to see the other games they have on offer and the value of the Game Pass and stuff like that? It seems like it's kind of an upsell moment for Microsoft.
True. Yeah.
You can always keep the branding side of things. All same tech underneath. It's just one's branded Battle.net, one's branded.
Maybe they have a Battle.net tray in the Xbox Game Pass app or something like that. I mean, I know it's not necessarily a part of Microsoft, but another sort of example, Riot still has their launcher and all of their games are in Game Pass too. And it's like sort of a separate update flow. Granted, not part of the Microsoft mothership, but another example.
I'm thinking about it from like the game dev side of it. From like the consumer side, it's like, it's great to be able to, access everywhere, anywhere, and just like that ease from the developer side, from the game dev side. Man, that just like is... It just adds so much effort across the board. Like the more launchers you have, the more like places where you're like distributing the game. It's in many ways it's worth it, right? If you're like reaching those players, but it definitely doesn't come for free. Of course, big games, big teams have the central teams to help them with all of that distribution as well. But it just makes it harder for the smaller teams to even break through.
Yeah. I mean, for those of you who've tried playing Ubisoft games or even some of the EA games through Steam, kind of the pain of having the 2 launcher problem, where basically like one launcher just launches the other, which launches the game. And then there's weird sometimes problems that come from that. Like, for example, I happen to have bought, Rainbow Six on Ubisoft, which apparently was the minority. Everyone seems to have bought it on Steam, but I actually have like a lot less problems launching the game because I'm just launching it from the native launcher instead of having to launch 2 separate things. And that seems like that could create problems with updating. And then, so for example, EA went from their sort of older launcher, that sort of Origin one, over to like the newer one, and that caused its own weird issues with having to like update and install, even if you were just playing the games through Steam. So it does seem like it cleans up some of that mess by just eventually transitioning people away from that older launcher. Especially like EA, demonstrates when they could just kind of gave up on, forcing everyone to their own thing. So I guess we'll see like whether or not that's a priority. I think it's probably an inevitability at some point, unless they really, really want to keep that brand affinity. But I think at this point, Blizzard's unfortunately destroyed a lot of their own brand affinity through many of their releases as of late. We'll see if they can recover that. But speaking of EA, they made some interesting plays here with the FIFA license.
So EA finally reached the day where they dropped the FIFA license and rebranded to EA FC 24 with the launch of their new game, kind of this year's not FIFA game. And this has been talked about for many years. There were rumors in many cycles. There was preparation. Earlier this year, EA explained a little bit more of their thinking, and of course there's a big piece around it from the monetary perspective, where the FIFA license, first of all, the last time they negotiated 10 years ago, they had very heavy restrictions on what they could and couldn't do with it, and what they could build with it, plus a very hefty price tag. There's reports that go as high as like $1 billion in a 4-year cycle. I didn't get a chance to like actually dig deeper into like, is that true or not? But regardless, I can see, FIFA being extremely expensive, and only giving kind of like a bump potentially like every 4 years with the World Cup. So EA, kind of aside from that, they also mentioned that they wanted to build more of a platform where they can really speak to fans within specific markets. So be able to, speak more directly to like UK fans with like Premier League, and Spain with La Liga, and just like different, licenses, and just, more affinity to what the day-to-day football world looks like. And the other piece that was very interesting is that they also mentioned that they're looking to build experiences where players can create more custom modes, maps, kind of more of this movement of games as platforms, as opposed to just kind of these static games that are controlled by the game developer only. So that's the context that they gave. And the day was here. They launched the game. They pushed really hard on the rebranding, and from the game specific, from 23 FIFA to EA FC 24, the game's not significantly different. So the main, the biggest thing is the rebrand that they're pushing with this one iteration. But they did kind of take a victory lap, calling out their biggest launch period after week 1, where they saw over 11 million players get the game, compared to 10 from FIFA 23 last year. And their EA Sports FC Mobile also saw pretty impressive numbers, and like I think it was like 11 million downloads in the first 10 days of release. So all of that is to say, it sounds like they didn't take any hit with moving away from the brand, that they did a good launch. But one of the questions that I have a few questions here for the group, but one is can EA actually sustain this success and execute on that strategy of attracting new players and do they actually have the DNA to build, more of a platform where they've even referenced like Fortnite creator features, or is EA not equipped, or we don't see it feasible that they will actually go after that more ambitious vision of what EA. I was going to say FIFA, but it's no longer FIFA. The EA FC brand can turn into.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? And maybe you don't know the answer, but like, what do they mean when they say expand into a platform? Because like when I think of platforms, I think of Fortnite, Roblox, something like that. And these are games that don't ship every year. Like Call of Duty isn't a platform. At least I wouldn't call it that, but I don't know. Maybe you have some more insight into that.
So when they talk about it as a platform, they definitely reference Fortnite, which is what piqued my interest. And that was one of the questions, in my mind was, are they actually going to move from these yearly incremental new releases to a live operated platform game, right? That those two are very different. So that's part of like my big question mark on this strategy and them like touting it, is they just look completely different. Like it sounds like they're positioning themselves to be able to do it, but they're just like completely different muscles they need to develop and way of thinking and operating the franchise.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Tammy. Those are much, much different looking teams than what they've had to date, where, they very much are all right, we got 9 months to build the next game and let's get it out. And, maybe that's the reason why this year was, much more about switching branding than about feature set. If they've got a different team that they're spinning up to try and tackle this platform type of approach. But I don't know, the FIFA machine that has existed for so long, certainly it's a big ship to try and turn into a different direction. I personally think they're going to have challenges because as you pointed out, it's a vastly different mindset.
I guess the question here is whether the audience is fine with just like mostly buying roster change kind of upgrades. I mean, there's an interesting point to be made in terms of like the whole retail space versus for the seasonal stuff. Like if GameStop is maybe just not, for example, relevant anymore, the whole idea, if you're just buying digitally anyways, of selling back your previous year and getting essentially the new year at a discount, if that's weakening, there might be less drive to pay full price for a brand new retail game. And that's already become kind of like difficult to manage anyways. If you look at like, what's happened with Diablo IV in terms of trying to manage sort of that in between live ops, making profit and the upfront price has just become such a sticking point. And then there was also kind of the thing that we had joked about when we first were discussing this topic way back, which was the idea that, come Christmas time, does grandma buy the kids the wrong game or not be able to find it, right? And if you're in a situation where it's not retail anymore and you're just upgrading the game essentially yearly, first off, it's a lot easier to deliver, hopefully smaller files to be able to deliver quickly. And then potentially they maybe could piecemeal it out. As you guys said, maybe they don't have the experience for it. And that might be something they have to deal with, maybe even hire some people for, or, bring in some expertise. But it does seem like there's the possibility that seasonal games might make more sense to transition towards more of a digital thing. And I'm even curious if that's something that we're also seeing from, say, something like Call of Duty that you mentioned in at least the Warzone, right? So one of the things that I thought was interesting was when I went to make some purchases recently in Warzone 2. Now, Warzone 2 is a sequel, obviously. It's a different game from Warzone 1, and there was issues with transitioning stuff over from there. And with Modern Warfare 3 coming out, I was like concerned, like, is my stuff going to work? Am I immediately going to lose this, like, a month from now? And they made sure to call out on the actual store page once I found it, no, it'll transition over. But that makes me think, is there no Warzone 3 then? Are they, shifting at least that game to being upgraded instead of, a full new game? And maybe we're just seeing kind of the tip of the spear for a lot of these games that were annual, looking at ways to make it a little smoother transition and focus on less around building huge feature sets out. I mean, we know all the money in FC or FIFA is in Ultimate Team anyways. not in that upfront retail price. Like, that's not really where they make the money. They would rather just people like not hesitate on upgrading for the next year and get them to just buy the Ultimate Team stuff again. Anyways, I think there's probably more profit in that than risking them not doing more Ultimate Team because they didn't upgrade the game. I mean, that's just my take on it. I mean, if you guys have any thoughts.
But I think those are two slightly different things in terms of revenue approach versus how the game is actually distributed and the team composition, because you can get a lot of what you're talking about from a revenue approach, even with a more traditional team structure. But that, transitioning, I think, to the team structure is a little bit more of a challenge. I think you're right, Devin, in that such a huge chunk of the revenues is from Ultimate Team. And that does lend itself to, an easy transition to more of a live operation style of game production. But, is the team ready to move to that level and really make that large of a bet with that large of a revenue generating title as FIFA is for EA?
And one of the things I saw with Rainbow Six was Ubisoft really struggling to make that shift, specifically because they were typically a company that was built around, let's build and ship and then maybe support with a small team with an expansion. And that was about it. They didn't really have like live ops experience for the most part, or at least a strong set of teams around it. And even the whole organizational structure with all the different studios still just wasn't equipped. I mean, they have some studios that had some experience, like Singapore had done Ghost Recon Phantoms, for example. But it was a huge difficult thing for them to do because a lot of the mindset around even the development pipeline over time, how much staffing to keep on a particular game was huge issues because they didn't have necessarily that same, like they were used to just, let's take all our people and just ship them over to another game to work on something else. And this was over at Ubisoft Montreal. And so they had problems with like, oh, we need those people back to support this. And so things like that, yeah, are absolutely not easy. I totally agree that making that kind of shift would require the people with, hopefully that's some experience in that, even if it's from another company, to help make that transition, because there's just so many pieces, especially as Matt pointed to earlier, a large company like that, that making those kind of transitions is not easy. Even at the team level, you're still dealing with a lot of times executive, high level interference, and a lot of that. A lot of those decisions, especially as we go into an environment where belts are starting to tighten quite a bit. And I mean, speaking of Ubisoft as well and belt tightening, just quickly wanted to throw out as well that also speaking of live ops in this regard, X Defiant, their next game that's sort of a live ops kind of experience in sort of that, I guess, related franchise, because it used to be Tom Clancy, and they took that off, which, purposely to give them a little bit more freedom around their IP usage. And I think just some of the restrictions of the license from the Tom Clancy estate was like maybe a little restricting on what they could do. Unfortunately, was indefinitely delayed. So that is not a great situation, as that adds to the pile of long delayed games. Hopefully this doesn't become a Skull and Bones kind of situation where it seems to be delayed forever. But the reason they gave was kind of interesting, in that they specifically said that there was just like I'm trying to remember the phrasing now, but around like the expectations not being met, or like something, what they seem to be alluding to possibly was some game design or balance issues that they were unable to reconcile quickly enough to push for a release, as they already hit gold basically and pushed it to consoles, got kicked back for bugs and things like that. We're working on that, fixing those, and then did a public test and decided it just like wasn't in the right shape that they wanted to be in, which seems like a big deal for a game that first off is live service, therefore it should be able to ideally balance a lot of it on the fly, but it might just be more fundamental, either monetization related issues or balance issues. And I have to say, as someone who played like pretty much all the betas for that game, except for literally that last one, it definitely did have some balance issues. So I could definitely see that being an issue, but I don't know. It definitely just a side note there. Not a story we want to get heavily into.
Actually, sorry, just to go back to FC for a second, I did have a question for Tammy. So one of the things that really drove back moves was FIFA. FIFA was, for a while, the competition with Konami. and Winning 11, and those two different game styles. And that really pushed, I think, both games to try and find their version of what they thought football should be for players. And, right now, the EA doesn't really have that same level of competition. So my question for Tammy is, do you think that there is the potential for someone to push EA into a particular direction, or without that competition, do you think they're more likely to be a bit more stagnant outside of branding?
That's a great question, because I did have in my notes kind of like an open question about whether detaching from FIFA makes them more vulnerable to having a competitor swoop in and basically either try to dethrone them or kind of get them back on kind of this high alert of like, man, we need to push the envelope here. It sounds like they're trying to stay a little bit ahead of it, just with rethinking their strategy with the franchise. So based on the numbers that they're seeing, I think that they've just given themselves some breathing room on competition not swooping in and like dethroning them very, very easily or very quickly. The next World Cup cycle is not for a few years. So if FIFA goes and licenses the game, the brand to another developer, EA, if they're staying on top of it, they can pretty much prevent getting pushed in a specific direction, and them kind of continue to forge their own path and their own future. I do think that it's hard to see someone that can overtake them or push them at that level of competition right now. But I do want to see them reinvent the cadence, how they're thinking about the franchise in general. I think that if they don't, then they're going to leave a door open there.
I think they have a real competitive moat with licenses. I think any competitor would really struggle to go through that patchwork of negotiations and agreements with players associations and clubs around the world and leagues. Like that's a huge competitive advantage. So I'm not going to say it's impossible, but if I were trying to compete in that space, I would take a different angle. Like I would go for less of a straight football simulation and do more like a casual soccer game or like an arcade style game, or I don't know, a different football manager type game, like something different. Because that's, I imagine, I've never worked in that space, but I imagine it's very difficult to overcome that negotiating and like agreement advantage.
Yeah, they do have signed like 30 leagues independently. Like they did a whole lot of work to get 30 leagues. I think it was like 100 plus stadiums, like 700 plus teams. You need you're right, Matt. Like you need a machinery to get any sort of license at that level. That's why my brain went to like, oh, they license FIFA and like some other team licenses FIFA and like that's how they shortcut it. But you have to time it with the World Cup. And then what comes next, right? Like they need to, like whatever team would do that, they need to keep, like what do they do next? Like the World Cup only comes every 4 years. And speaking of like a more casual approach, there's actually like a little game that came out, I think like last week on mobile, AFK Football from Wildlife Studios. And it's a idle RPG, like a football manager idle RPG. I was just like playing around with it a little bit. It's funny how they mentioned it, Matt. And I'm like, they took like a pretty creative approach where they, they're doing lookalikes of famous players to just not have to license stuff.
Yeah, I guess there's also always the opportunity to make a football game that just uses your own IP. Like as Dave mentioned, Mario Strikers. There used to be Mega Man Soccer. I mean, there's also the ones that are trying to be that sort of MOBA soccer hybrid, like Omega Strikers, which unfortunately isn't doing great. But I mean, as you said, Matt, there are alternatives to just trying to just straight up compete. I mean, obviously the Madden games were popular, but NFL Blitz did fine on its own. NBA Jam was a thing for a while. I don't know if those have like super long lifespans, but for one-offs, they seem to do okay if they can get people's attention. So there's opportunity. I wouldn't necessarily be out there trying to get the FIFA license, hoping I could compete with them. I think given the way that FIFA's shown their negotiation tactics to go, I think I would be pretty hard pressed to try and make a deal with them unless they started getting desperate, which wouldn't be soon after this deal. You'd be waiting a bit, I would think. But we'll see. Definitely like a lot of potential for things to shift over time. But in the meantime, EA seems to be doing fine, and Christmas season hasn't even hit yet. So we'll see if Grandma can find the game on the shelves for that as Black Friday hits next month. But in the meantime, we just wanted to kind of quickly go over some of the broader topic and recent events around layoffs, which we've kind of not touched on too much, but it's becoming a very popular, I guess, thing at the moment.
Yeah, sadly. In many ways, this is like one of the news stories of the year for our industry. And given some of the recent, updates to this story, I thought it would be worth sort of bringing to the group and seeing if we can make sense of it a little bit. So, if you're in the industry and you've been on LinkedIn recently, it's like almost every day, every other day, someone's posting about their studio shutdown, their company's going through layoffs, reduction in force. And there was an article from VentureBeat that references a site called videogamelayoffs.com that tracks this. And by their count, last month, September, saw 17 gaming companies issue layoffs, which was the highest monthly total for 2023 thus far. There have already been 5 in October. And they, by their count, over 6,100 gaming jobs have been cut in 2023. And even videogamelayoffs.com states that this number is likely underreported. I would agree with that assessment. It's probably much more than 6,100. And just a couple of highlights, lowlights, the companies that have laid off the most people here at the top, Unity. Then not far behind them was Epic Games. Amazon, Embracer has gone through a number of reductions in force, EA as well. Sega, Gameloft, CD Projekt, and then Microsoft. So obviously these are all big companies. You have to be big to begin with to have layoffs of that size. But there's also, countless smaller studios, startups that have struggled and gone through layoffs. So, there's no one specific story here, but I wanted to kind of open it up to the group and just ask a couple of questions around like, where do we see this going? Because obviously, like it's a tough economy outside of gaming too, and layoffs are occurring in tech more broadly. But for our industry specifically, maybe just to start the discussion, do you all see this as like a right sizing, like these companies overhired, and now we're getting back to quote unquote the right size for these organizations? Or is this just going to be kind of like a shuffling of the decks where people go from big companies to small companies, or they go from one company to another, where they find a more long-term fit? Or maybe it's something else entirely. Let's just start there. What do you all think? Is this right sizing?
I think we are in a situation. The game industry has gone through cycles where they've had larger layoff periods, smaller layoff periods. There's cycles that happen during the course of every year. I unfortunately don't think that this is really the end of it. There are a lot of companies that have shipped, are in process of shipping their big Christmas title. With that, unfortunately, tends to come a reduction in size of the teams that worked on that. So unfortunately, I do see it as continuing. There are a number of other things that are a little bit unique, though, to this particular period, where you've got the combination of coming off a very large uptake in gaming through the period of COVID, which is now cooling off. And even though if you look at it from a growth perspective and kind of leveled out the COVID period, we're still on an overall, as an industry, we're continuing to grow. It is a reduction from that COVID period. So people were hiring for that time, hiring for, hey, this is maybe the new normal. Item number 2 that's contributing to everything, money's no longer cheap. It's no longer easy to fund development, fund people. Item number 3, inflation. It's not just more expensive for people, it's more expensive for companies. So, inflation is certainly taking a hit on everything right now. So I think it's really a combination of factors that is really attributing itself to where we are today with the number of layoffs. There are a number of openings inside the games industry. So I do think that there will be some shift. But, also based on what I've seen in other cycles, we will see some people decide that they're going to leave the industry. That, the video game industry certainly has its highs, but it's also got its lows. And, some people are going to look for a little bit more consistent, type of employment. I've seen people that, left really exciting video game jobs to go work, making programs for insurance companies. And that where it's very much, I'm working 9 to 5 and that's it. So my thoughts are, it's a little bit of unprecedented time in terms of the number of factors that are taking into account for all these layoffs. And unfortunately, it's not quite done yet.
Yeah, and I think to add a little bit to what you were saying, Dave, in terms of the is there a reshuffle happening? I think part of what's very new in this instance of layoffs and boosts and bursts of bubbles, if we were to call it like a bubble of post during COVID where we had a high, is what you were saying about money is no longer cheap to find, basically, like with all of the broader economic factors. It's harder and harder for small companies right now to pop up and like startups to get going because funding is much tighter, with the exception of, and this has even slowed down, but with the exception of teams that are taking on some AI angle and money is flowing freely with that AI angle. The difference is that part of that pitch is we're going to stay small and lean and leverage AI so that we don't have to hire, we hire half the people. We are like a much smaller, leaner team and find these efficiencies through AI. So, although we are going to see more jobs open with kind of this influx of startups that are getting funded, for AI endeavors, I think it's going to be much slower to ramp up and have a cap there because it comes with this assumption of headcount efficiencies.
Seems like that it might be a good idea if you're just kind of laid off for a while to then learn that AI skill set. So you could say, well, you don't hire me because I could do double the work. If they're looking for those efficiencies, if they can't find those people to like in the remaining people in the company to fill that, but just a thought.
I definitely would encourage anyone to learn the AI tools if you have the bandwidth, whether or not you've been laid off. But I think a lot of great points raised. One, maybe just to rephrase the question a little bit, I heard inflation. I heard, funding is drying up. Difficult environment. But outside of maybe like the COVID boom for gaming, I wonder if these factors are unique to games, or if gaming is just experiencing the same thing that every other industry is experiencing. Like many other industries are being disrupted by AI. Many other industries are facing difficult funding environments, inflationary, economy. Like, is there anything specific to gaming that we're seeing the fallout of?
I don't know. I think the last time we kind of had that same sort of thought, games are recession proof. There was different types of entertainment available, right? Like back then you didn't have your Netflix, you didn't have free to play games, you didn't have options that, allowed you to get a hold of a lot of content for very, very inexpensive or for free or, for $15 a month. So I do think that there certainly is a bit of a change there. if your options were, am I going to spend $15 for 2 hours of entertainment, or am I going to spend $50 for 60 hours of entertainment? A lot of people would say, well, I'll pay the 60. I'm entertained for quite a while. That decision point is certainly changed this time around. So I'm not sure if we're going to see that same level of willingness to spend when they've got different options that are certainly a lot cheaper for people to undertake.
I think that there's also one piece that is going to be a factor here, and it's a little bit of a longer term. But we have kind of this aging generation of gamers, right? That grew up with games, and we have kind of like the new generation of gamers coming to age, starting to get a little bit more disposable income, with Gen Zers and the next generation as well. I think one of the big differences is like they're much more heavily gamers. Like I was looking at some surveys, and it's like the majority of the generation plays games in some way or form. But there's also a piece there where we have these platforms, these games as platforms with Minecraft, with Roblox, that are encouraging them and teaching them to build their own games. And a lot of them are like much smaller, like, now you have developers that are like 20 years old and have been developing games for Roblox for 10 years or something like that. And I think it's just going to change the industry in some way. And it's going to change, how we think about, just jobs and teams, in the size of teams. It's going to take a little bit longer for that to, shuffle out and see where we land. But I think it's definitely going to have an impact.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the impression I always get in situations like this, where a lot of this stuff's kind of converging, is that it might be time for some business model shift. Like, obviously business models don't necessarily completely go away, but there starts to become an opportunity just when the conditions are right for some new ideas or some adapted ideas to come in potentially, just kind of that evolution adaptation. And so Dave talking about the sort of streaming services being this sort of like, I can get a whole bunch of stuff for cheap, which is, I'm definitely guilty of that, having that mentality many times, where I'm just like, I could have 100 games for $10, or I could, spend 100 games on one, or $100 on one game, It's an interesting dilemma for people that start to lose their discretionary spending and start to have to pull back or like dedicate to hobbies or something like that. And so it makes me think that, maybe there needs to be some more adaptation around business models for game development for streaming games. But the other thing that, I think that maybe Tammy brought up was just this idea also around UGC monetization and platforms as well, in the sense that, part of the cost of game development is the content. We talk about AI to kind of help with that, but also UGC is another potential path for kind of offloading some of that work about the content to sort of make it like easier, and then you create a business model around that. And it calls back to what one of the Nexon people was saying at the Korea blockchain about MapleStory adapting the blockchain stuff for the business model, to where it was also like, he was saying like, these people are creating content much faster than us and more efficiently than us. So let's create some economy monetization around that. And maybe that's part of this shift we could see is both those things, where it's, maybe some streaming services or other ways to sort of like handle the fact that you might not get money up front, and that free to play is very competitive to acquire customers. Instead, you partner up with the streaming service, and then you find ways to use that as a platform then to get people staying in your content, and then creating for it, and then finding ways to like capitalize maybe on transaction fees, stuff like that. Obviously, we've got better tax or tech now for taxing transactions and taking royalties and things like that. So it seems like there's a lot of opportunities here, but food for thought. Definitely a lot of stuff, and hopefully those of you out there affected by the layoffs are able to find quick work, or find an insurance company you want to work for that you're excited about. There is opportunities out there. I mean, it could be an office space moment, and maybe you just want to fish and do construction, but either way, hopefully everyone finds a good home, or at least something really cool to do in the meantime, because unfortunately I don't think this is changing all that soon, but also, spend some time learning the AI stuff. In the meantime, though, thank you for everyone coming in today. Great topics, as always, great discussions. I feel like we're always almost limited by the clock, if anything else, because I'm sure there's plenty more we could crack into, and we probably will in the next episode or the one after that. So thanks again for everyone listening as well, and just wish you all a happy weekend, and we'll see you next week.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@navic.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Navic has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.navic.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Navic Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.navic.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.